The first thing Sergeant Dara Kessler noticed about the Gret girl was that she was bleeding. Not much. A thin line of dark green tracing the ridge of her jaw, already clotting in the cold, the way Gret blood did thick as tree sap, smelling faintly of copper and pine. She was crouched behind the back wall of the chapel, knees pulled to her chest, both hands pressed flat against the stone as though she were trying to push herself through it. Her gray-green skin was pale in the way that meant fear or cold or both. Her tusks, small ones, the kind that meant she was young, maybe 19, were chattering so slightly she probably didn't know she was doing it. Kessler saw all of this in the half-second before she heard the boots. 3 of them soldiers. Not hers, she could tell by the cadence, the weight. The Arkeni volunteers, most likely, the irregular militia that had been moving through the valley since yesterday morning, doing the kind of work that irregular militias do when command isn't watching. She had seen what they left behind in the village of Asta. She had not said anything at the time, and she had hated herself for it since. She looked at the girl. The girl looked at her. Neither of them spoke. Kessler moved without deciding to. She pressed herself into the alcove beside the girl, one shoulder against the stone wall, and pulled her jacket, the long waxed canvas one she'd worn since Pelter, the one with the rank patch mostly peeled off, across both of them like a curtain, her body between the girl and the open end of the alley. The boots rounded the corner. 3 men, one of them holding a lamp, one of them holding a rifle at the kind of casual angle that meant he'd been doing this for a while. The third one was younger, barely a soldier, watching the other 2 for cues. Kessler leaned against the wall, feet stretched out, head tilted as though resting. She had her own rifle laid across her knees. She looked up at them the way a person looks at a mild inconvenience. "Evening," she said. The one with the lamp stopped. His face did something complicated. He'd expected to find something else in this alley. "Sergeant," he said. His eyes moved over her briefly, then to the shadow behind her. She was a large woman, not tall, but wide in the shoulders in the way of someone who had been carrying heavy things since before she was grown, and she filled the alcove well. "Bit late to be running patrols," she said pleasantly. "We got reports of—" "I know what you got reports of," Kessler said. Her voice stayed easy. "I also know what your patrol looked like in Asta. I was there. Remember that when you decide whether to walk past me tonight or not." The lamp holder looked at the rifle holder. The rifle holder looked at Kessler. Something passed between them that was not bravery. They walked on. She stayed where she was until she couldn't hear the boots anymore. Then she counted to 60. Then she dropped the jacket from her shoulder. The Gret girl had not moved. She was still pressing her palms flat against the stone, but her tusks had stopped chattering. "You speak trade?" Kessler asked. The girl nodded, a single jerk of her chin. "Good." Kessler stood, looked both ways up the alley, and then crouched back down to the girl's level. "That cut on your jaw, do you have more of them?" A pause. Then the girl pulled back the collar of her shirt to show 3 parallel lines across her collarbone, not deep, but deliberate. Kessler felt something settle in her chest that was not quite anger and not quite sorrow, and was, she had learned over the years, more dangerous than either. "My name is Kessler," she said. "I'm going to get you out of this valley. That's not kindness. Don't mistake it for that. It's a debt I owe to the people of Asta, who I failed to protect yesterday, and I'm paying it to you because you're what's in front of me. Do you understand?" The girl looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were amber, the deep particular amber of Gret from the coastal clans, and they were older than the rest of her face. "I understand," she said. Her trade was accented but clean. "My name is Save." "All right, Save." Kessler stood. "Stay close. Don't run unless I run. If I tell you to go, you go. You don't look back, you don't wait for me." Agreed. Save unfolded herself from the wall. She was taller than Kessler by half a head leaner, with the heavy musculature of Gret who had grown up doing physical work. She looked for a moment like she wanted to say something complicated. Then she just said, "Agreed." They went north out of the village, staying off the road. The valley of Kern had been, before the war, a farming settlement. Barley mostly, and some grain the Gret called *veth that didn't have a trade equivalent. It had been, Kessler had heard, unremarkable in every way, a gentle sloping valley between two ridges, a river that flooded predictably in spring, 300 people who knew each other's names and argued about property lines and held festivals in late summer when the harvest came in. The kind of place that exists in the background of the world that nobody writes about, that only becomes known for what gets done to it. She'd been sent here to assess whether the Northern Compact's supply line through Kern was viable. 6-day assignment. Map the roads, gauge the bridge weight capacity, report back. That was 11 days ago. She moved through the barley fields with Save 2 paces behind her, both of them low, using the ridge of standing grain as cover. The barley was tall and dense and smelled of earth and coming rain. It whispered when they moved through it. "How long were you in the valley?" Kessler asked quietly, not turning around. 3 weeks, Save said. "I came with the Compact survey team. I was a translator." A pause. "I am the only one left." Kessler kept moving. "What happened to the others?" "The volunteers," Save said. The word came out flat. "The first week they ignored us. The second week they started checking our papers, every day, 4 or 5 times, every time asking different questions. The third week they stopped asking." "Did you try to leave?" "We tried on the 6th day." Another pause longer. "I ran. Varen did not run fast enough. Paul had a family in Hareth. He thought if he explained, she stopped. He explained for a long time. It did not help." Kessler said nothing for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said finally. It was a useless word and she knew it, and she said it anyway, because sometimes useless words were the only ones that fit. "You did not kill them," Save said. "No, but I was here." The barley whispered around them. Far to the south, back toward the village, a light moved across the road, another patrol or something else. Kessler watched it until it stopped moving, then looked away. "Where are you trying to reach?" she asked. "The Gret delegation at Vora," Save said. 40 kilometers northeast. If I can reach them." She hesitated. "There are people there who need to know what happened here. There are people there who can make it matter. Who can put names to what this was." "What was this?" A long quiet. Save's footfalls were careful in the grain, deliberate. Kessler had expected Gret to be loud, crashing things. That was the story she'd been told since she was a girl. The big shoulders, the heavy tread, the brute strength. Save moved like water, finding the path of least resistance. "Kern was the second valley," Save said finally. "Asta before it. 3 more in the province we do not have confirmed reports from yet. The volunteers are not doing this by accident. Someone is directing them. Someone who wants the northern corridor clear of Gret settlements before the next compact session, so that when they draw the new boundary lines there is no one left to contest them." Kessler thought about the maps she'd been drawing. The roads, the bridge weight, the supply route that curved carefully around 3 Gret villages rather than through them, as though they had already been subtracted from the geography. She'd noticed. She'd filed it as a route optimization question and kept drawing. The rain started coming down, soft and then heavy, flattening the grain around them. "All right," Kessler said, 40 kilometers, let's talk about how we do this." They made a camp that first night in a drainage culvert under an old stone road, barely wide enough for both of them, the rain drumming on the stonework overhead. Kessler had a field kit, rations for 4 days if stretched, a small medical pack, her rifle and 2 clips of ammunition. She cleaned the cut on Save's jaw with what she had. Save sat still for it, which was harder than it looked. Kessler knew. "It stings." "You don't have to do that," Save said. "I know," Kessler applied a field strip across the cleaned cut. Who taught you trade? My father. He was a trader before. He worked the river routes between Vora and Halden for 20 years. A faint something crossed her face. He said the reason to learn the language of the people you trade with is not so you can speak to them. It is so you can understand what they say about you when they think you cannot hear. Kessler almost smiled. Sounds like a practical man. He was. The past tense sat between them without comment. Kessler opened 2 ration tins and gave one to Save. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing. This was the other thing they didn't tell you about field work. Not the danger, not the hardship, but the flatness. The way everything tasted of nothing after a certain point. The way the body just kept doing what it was supposed to do, kept eating, kept moving, kept breathing, while the mind was somewhere else entirely, going through things over and over like a hand checking a wound. Ask, Save said, without looking up from her tin. What? You have been wanting to ask something since the alley, I can hear it. She looked up. The amber eyes were direct and without heat. Gret hear a lot of things that humans think they are not saying. It is in the breathing, in the pauses. Kessler was quiet for a moment. Then, why didn't you run when they came into the alley? You had time. You heard them before I did. I know you did. You could have run. Save looked at the ration tin. I was afraid that running would make them chase me, she said. I have learned that if you run, they chase. If you are still, they sometimes decide you are not what they are looking for. A pause. It was not a good plan. I had run out of good plans. But you'd been surviving on your own for 3 days. Yes. You knew the terrain better than they did. Yes. You could have moved faster than most of them. Your people do, no offense. None taken. A pause. You are asking why a Gret female with 3 days of survival experience sat and waited to be found, rather than running. I'm asking what you were actually thinking. Save was quiet for a long moment. Outside the culvert, the rain moved through the fields in waves, the soft, continuous percussion of it. I was thinking about Varen, she said at last, and about Paul, and about the survey leader whose name was Anwen, who was 43 years old and had 4 children, and who died trying to protect her notes because she thought if anyone ever read them it would matter. She paused. I was thinking that I did not want to run anymore, that I was tired of being afraid and tired of running, and that if they found me I would at least be still when they did. I would not give them the pleasure of the chase. Kessler looked at her. That is not, Save added carefully, a state of mind I recommend. No, Kessler said, but I understand it. They sat in the culvert, listening to the rain. Get some sleep, Kessler said. I'll take first watch. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Kessler said. Go to sleep, Save. Save went to sleep. The second day was harder. There were 2 volunteer checkpoints on the northern road, and they had to swing wide of both, which added kilometers and cost them the better part of the morning. Kessler's knee had been complaining since Pelter, an old insult to the joint from her 3rd year of service, the kind of thing that didn't heal so much as learn to coexist with you, and the wide swings through rough terrain were renegotiating that coexistence. She didn't mention it. Save, who could hear the way she breathed when she favored the leg, also didn't mention it. By midday they had reached the ridge that overlooked the river crossing at Hafen Ford, which was the most direct route northeast. The ford was guarded. 4 soldiers on the eastern bank, 2 on the western, and a small wooden booth that someone had set up in the middle of the road that said Compact Authority in letters that had been painted and then repainted over, as though the authority in question kept changing names. We can't go around, Kessler said, looking down at it from the tree line. The next crossing is 16 kilometers south. We'd lose a full day. I know the ford, Save said. She was crouching beside her, studying the western bank. My father used it every season. There is a passage about 200 meters upstream. A gravel bank, shallow, comes to just above the knee at high water. The current pulls south, So you enter from the north side and walk downstream while you cross. Is it passable in rain? My father crossed it in the spring flood, Save said. It is passable. Kessler looked at the guards, then at the sky, then at her bad knee, which offered no useful input. After dark, she said. Yes. They waited in the tree line while the light moved. Kessler broke out the second 2 rations. Save ate hers slowly this time, looking down at the river with a focused expression that wasn't quite calm and wasn't quite fear, something in between, something Kessler had seen on soldiers before a movement. The face that comes when action is still theoretical, but not theoretical for long. Tell me about your father's trade route, Kessler said. Save looked at her. Why? Because we're going to be sitting here for 3 hours, and you can either spend them thinking about the ford or talking, and thinking about the ford isn't going to change the ford. Save considered this. Then slowly she began to talk. She talked about the river routes between Vora and Halden, the way the water changed color at the delta, the blue-green of the Gret coast that was different from the gray-green of the human shore, as though the 2 populations had filtered the water differently over centuries. She talked about her father's trade goods, dyed cloth mostly, the deep purples and reds that the highland Gret produced from shellfish, which humans in the lowland cities paid high prices for, and which, Save said with a dry humor that surprised Kessler, they frequently mispronounced the name of. She talked about the way her father counted the hours on long crossings, not by the sun, which was unreliable, but by the rhythm of the oar, a steady pull-in-dress that he had taught her when she was 4 years old, sitting in the stern of his boat, trying to match his timing. He said the river doesn't care how strong you are, Save said. It cares how patient you are. Every person who drowned in the Vora current drowned because they fought it. Don't fight the current, Kessler said. Angle across it. Yes. Kessler turned this over. She had not grown up near water. She had grown up in the coal valley of Metren, where the only body of water was the black tailings pond at the edge of town that nobody swam in, and that left a ring of gray sediment on everything that touched it. She had joined the compact surveying corps at 22 because it paid, and because she had been good at maps, and because staying in Metren felt like slow surrender to something she couldn't name. She had spent 16 years walking across the geography of a world that was being argued over and divided and redrawn, marking bridges and roads, and the weight limits of structures built by people who were no longer there to argue over them. She had been to the edges of Gret territory a dozen times. She had drawn their roads and their bridges. She had never talked to a Gret woman about her father's trade route. She thought about the maps she had filed, the route that curved around the villages. The light moved west. The river went silver, then gray, then dark. Now, Kessler said. The ford was cold. This was the first and loudest thing about it. The cold. The kind that entered through the boots and then climbed, that reorganized all of one's priorities in the first 3 steps away from the bank. The gravel shifted underfoot and the current pulled south and steady, and Kessler angled into it, the way Save's father had taught, upstream first, letting the current carry her sideways as she waded, feeling for the bottom with each step before trusting it. Save moved ahead of her, one hand trailing in the water for balance, reading the bottom through her feet with a confidence that came from something older than experience, from the knowledge that had been put into her hands by her father's hands, and before that by his mother's hands and back, the accumulated knowing of people who had crossed rivers. The water came to Kessler's thigh at the deepest point, then receded. She kept her rifle up. On the eastern bank, the guards were sitting around a small fire, their backs to the water, not looking. Either they were lazy or they had done this long enough to stop worrying. She hoped for lazy but planned for something stopping them. Nothing stopped them. They came out on the eastern bank and stood dripping in the reeds for 30 seconds while Kessler checked the darkness for movement. Well, she said. Save wrung water from the hem of her shirt. My father also said, she said, that the worst crossings always feel manageable once you are on the other side. Sensible man. He had an answer for everything, Save said. There was a small, complicated warmth in her voice. It was sometimes deeply irritating. Kessler felt something shift in her chest again. Not the anger-sorrow thing this time, something lighter. She turned away before it showed on her face. Northeast, she said, let's move. The third day. They had been moving since before dawn, and Kessler's knee had stopped negotiating and started issuing demands, which she met by wrapping it tighter and refusing to slow down, which was not a sustainable response, but was the only one available. They were 12 kilometers from Vora by her estimation. The terrain had changed, the flat farming valley behind them. Now the low wooded hills that formed the southern approach to the Gret administrative corridor, old-growth oak and pine, with a forest floor deep in needlefall that quieted their passage to almost nothing. She heard the rider before she saw him. A horse moving at a walk. One horse, one rider, coming south along a track that intersected their line of travel about 50 meters ahead. She put her hand back and Save stopped instantly. No sound, already down. The rider appeared between the trees. He was wearing a compact surveying corps uniform, her unit, her collar markings, the same waxed canvas she was wearing. He had a courier's satchel across his chest and was riding with the preoccupied air of someone with a destination and a deadline. He was not someone she recognized. Which was wrong. She knew everyone in her unit. She had been with this assignment's survey team since Pelter. He rode past and disappeared south. She stayed where she was for 3 minutes. Then she looked at Save. "Did you see what was in the satchel?" she asked. Save shook her head. "But I heard him," she said. "Before I saw him. He was riding with weight on the left side, slight shift in how the saddle leather moved. The satchel was full." "Full of what?" Save looked at her steadily. "Survey maps," she said. "The specific smell of the paper they use, I know it. I worked with survey teams for 2 years. A pause. And something else underneath that. Ink, fresh-pressed seal ink." Kessler stared at the empty track where the rider had been. New maps, already sealed, moving south while she was still 11 days into a 6-day assignment. The route that curves around the villages, because someone already knew the villages would be empty. She felt the shape of it come together. Not like a shock, it came in slowly, the way that the worst things often came, the ones you had almost known for a while and had been not knowing on purpose. The assignment in Kern had not been an assessment of a supply route. It had been a time-filling exercise to keep her and her unit out of the northern corridor while the volunteers worked through the valley settlements. And when they were done, the new maps would already be sealed and signed, and the boundary session would proceed with a geography that had been made to order. And nobody had expected her to still be here. Nobody had expected her to still be asking questions. She looked at the copies of her own field notes in the pocket of her jacket, the measurements, the bridge ratings, the small notes she'd written in the margins, the ones that said things like asterisk route deviation unexplained, 3 Gret settlements within 2 km, why the avoidance, and recommend investigation of volunteer activities in eastern villages before finalizing. Nobody was going to read those notes. She understood that now clearly. "The delegation at Vora," Kessler said, "how senior?" "Third Minister Orvith is presiding," Save said. "With the boundary session in 4 days, he will be receiving representatives from every compact province, including the human provincial chairs, including people who have enough standing to demand an inquiry." She looked at Kessler. "If the inquiry is demanded before the boundary session votes, the new maps cannot be adopted. The vote must be deferred pending investigation. And if the vote goes through first, then what happened in Kern becomes historical, not current, much harder to prosecute." 4 days. 12 kilometers. "All right," Kessler said. She looked at her knee without affection, then at the trees ahead, then back at Save. "We have a problem." "I know," Save said. "You are going to say your knee." "I was going to say my knee." "How bad?" "I can do 12 kilometers, Kessler said. "But not at speed, and not without telling everyone within 2 kilometers that I'm doing it. Gravel paths are finished. We have to stay on soft ground." Save studied the tree line. "The forest runs northeast for the next 8 kilometers, she said. "Soft ground. After that there is a livestock road made of pressed earth, which is not gravel, and then the outer districts of Vora." She looked at Kessler. "I know these trees. I walked them as a girl." "Then you're navigating from here." Save looked at her with an expression that was not quite surprise and not quite something else, something that was still being decided. "You're serious," she said. "You know the ground better than I do, and your knee works," Kessler said. "So yes, I'm serious. You're navigating. I'll stay on your 6 and try not to embarrass myself." A long pause. Something happened in Save's face, not dramatic, not showy. Just a small, careful settling, like a stone finding level ground. "All right," she said. She turned northeast, and Kessler followed. And for the first time since the culvert, Kessler was not the one choosing the path. Save moved through the forest like she had been born to it, which in a sense she had. She picked lines through the trees with no apparent deliberation, moving over root systems without breaking stride, finding the soft moss passages between the needle drifts where the ground was quiet and even. She navigated by things Kessler couldn't name, by the angle of light through canopy, by the sound of water she hadn't yet seen, by some inner compass that had been calibrated in childhood and never lost its setting. Kessler moved behind her and held on. Her knee was manageable on the soft ground, not good, but manageable. She fell into the rhythm of it, the way she had learned to in long field assignments, not thinking about the distance ahead, only about the ground underfoot. The next step, and the next, the rest of it could wait. "My father brought me here once," Save said quietly, not breaking her stride. "When I was 7. He was meeting a trade contact in Vora, and he brought me because my mother had gone to the Coast Festival and there was no one at home." She paused to step over a wide route, then continued. "I was very bored by the trade meeting. Afterwards he took me into the forest. We walked for 2 hours, and then he showed me a tree. There is a great oak in the northeastern section, older than the compact, older than the boundary arguments, older than any of the names that have been put on this land. He put my hand on the bark and he said, 'The trees do not know about borders.'" Kessler said nothing for a moment, moving through the space between 2 close-standing pines. "What did you say?" "I was 7, Save said. "I said I was hungry." The laugh came out of Kessler before she could manage it, a short, actual one, the kind that surprised her. Save glanced back over her shoulder, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a way that was almost a smile and was, Kessler thought, possibly better than one. "He fed me," Save added. "He always carried twice as much food as he needed, in case he met someone who had less." A pause. "It was an excellent quality in a father. It was also why we were never particularly wealthy." "Sounds about right," Kessler said. They walked in silence for a while. The forest was dark and resinous and full of small movement birds higher up, the occasional rustle in the undergrowth that was nothing, the drip of yesterday's rain off the canopy. Kessler had spent a lot of time in forests. She'd learned to read them as documents, the way a forest remembered what had been done in it, the way old growth held its history in the spacing of trees and the character of undergrowth, the way a cut-over area grew back with a different texture than growth that had never been disturbed. This forest had not been disturbed in a long time. It felt intact. "What happens," Kessler said, "if the delegation believes you, if the inquiry gets called? What actually changes?" "In the short term," Save considered. "The vote defers. The volunteers' activities become subject to compact investigation. The officers who directed them, and they were directed, someone directed them, face proceedings. She paused. Possibly more than that. The documentation Anwen was protecting when she died, those were survey records that contradicted the maps that Ryder was carrying south. If they can be introduced before the session. Anwen's notes, Kessler said. Where are they? Save stopped walking. She turned around. She looked at Kessler with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously. I have them, she said. Kessler looked at her. I have them, Save repeated. She reached into the inside of her shirt and withdrew a sealed oilskin pouch, flat and square, the kind used for protecting documents in field conditions. Anwen gave them to me before they took her. She said, if you get out, you know what these are for. I did not tell you because, she stopped. Because you didn't know if you could trust me, Kessler said. Yes. Silence. And now, Kessler asked. Save looked at the pouch in her hands, then she held it out. Kessler took it. She felt the weight of it, just paper, just notes, just the measurements of a careful woman who had worked in the field and written down what she saw. Nothing heavy about it except everything. I'll carry it until we reach Vora, she said. Then you present them, not me. The delegation will listen to you. You were there. You have standing. I'm a compact surveyor with a compromised assignment and no official reason to be in the valley. You protected me, Save said. Yes, Kessler said. That's not testimony, that's just what I should have done earlier. Save studied her face for a moment. Whatever she was looking for, she appeared to find some version of it. Northeast, she said and turned. They walked. The last kilometers were harder. Kessler had stopped thinking about her knee because thinking about it was making it worse, and not thinking about it was at least not making it worse. The soft ground ended 4 kilometers from Vora and became the packed earth livestock road, and then the outer districts. And with the harder surface came the noise, livestock, cartwheels, voices, the general accumulating sound of a city that was gearing up for a major administrative event and didn't yet know anything was wrong. The Gret districts of Vora were in the eastern quarter, built into the slope of a hill that the original settlement had been built around. The buildings low and wide, with the characteristic Gret construction of thick walls and narrow windows that Kessler had always found somehow reassuring, though she'd never thought about why. Save navigated through them with her shoulders up and her chin down, moving fast, and Kessler moved beside her. Nobody stopped them. This surprised Kessler, who had been tensed for it. But the streets were full of delegation traffic, people arriving, officials moving in clusters, the brisk purposeful crowding of bureaucratic assembly, and 2 people walking fast with muddy boots and the expression of people with somewhere to be, were not, in this context, unusual. The delegation hall was a long building on the hill's crown. Gret architecture at its formal end, which meant carved stone, not the graceful carved stone of human civic buildings, but the geometric low-relief stonework of Gret craft, interlocking patterns that told stories in a visual language Kessler had never learned to read. She looked at them as they climbed the steps and wished for the first time that she'd thought to ask. Maybe she would ask after. The hall interior was busy and large and smelled of candle smoke and paper. Save walked straight to the central desk without slowing down. I need to see 3rd Minister Orveth, she said in trade, and then repeated it in Gret, and then in what Kessler assumed was the coastal dialect. My name is Save, daughter of Harev of the Vora River trade, and I have documentation pertaining to activities in the Kern Valley that must be placed before the minister before the boundary session convenes. The person at the desk looked at her, at the cut on her jaw, at the mud on her clothes, at her overall appearance of someone who had walked 40 kilometers in the rain, and then back at their register. Name again, the person said. Save. Daughter of Harev. A pause and then quieter with something very careful in her voice. Tell him Harev's daughter is asking. He will know the name. The registrar looked at her for another moment. Then they stood and went into the back of the hall. Kessler and Save stood at the desk. Kessler's knee announced its presence firmly. She shifted her weight and said nothing. "You knew the minister," Kessler said quietly. "My father brought trade goods to the minister's household for 15 years, Save said. Orvith used to give me fruit candy when I came with my father. He called me the little river rat." She paused. "I hope he still remembers." The registrar came back. "The minister will see you," they said, "immediately." They were in with the minister for 4 hours. Third Minister Orvith was a large man even by Gret's standards, old in the way of people who had been powerful for a long time and had learned to hold it without showing the effort. He sat behind a table covered in papers, and he listened to Save without interrupting, which was, Kessler had learned, the rarest thing a powerful person could do. When Save finished, he asked 3 questions. Then he looked at the oilskin pouch. Kessler set it on the table. He opened it and read Anwen's notes with the focused attention of a man who had spent his life reading reports and knew how to find the things that other people hoped he wouldn't. He was silent for a long time. Then he called for his secretary and dictated 3 letters, speaking quickly and precisely, and the secretary wrote them down and was gone before Kessler had fully registered what they contained. One to the Boundary Session Chair, requesting immediate deferral pending formal inquiry. One to the Compact Internal Audit Office, requesting seizure of all survey documents filed from the Kern assignment, including courier dispatches. One to the Provincial Command Authority, requesting suspension of the Arkhenny volunteers pending investigation. When the secretary was gone, he looked at Save. "Harev's little river rat," he said quietly. "He is gone," Save said. A long silence. "I know," Orvith said. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, a brief, deliberate gesture, the kind that was not dramatic and was not insufficient. "He was a good man and a good trader, and I was proud to know him." He withdrew his hand. "Who else was lost?" Save told him. He listened to every name. Kessler sat beside her and watched an old, powerful man receive the weight of those names and did not look away. The inquiry took 11 weeks. Kessler spent most of them in Vora, providing testimony about the Kern assignment, the anomalous survey route, the rider she had seen in the forest with the sealed maps. Her own field notes were subpoenaed and introduced and analyzed by the inquiry board, and the margin notes, the ones she'd written and told herself were just questions, just observations, not conclusions, turned out to be, in retrospect, a fairly detailed record of everything she had noticed and had not yet let herself call by its name. She was not punished for the assignment itself, which she had expected. She was commended, which she had not. The citation language was careful and bureaucratic, and she didn't keep it. The Boundary Session was deferred, as Orvith had requested. The new maps were seized. The officers who had directed the volunteers were named in the inquiry report, which was public, which was the part that mattered. What happened after that was the work of other people, lawyers, diplomats, elected representatives, journalists who cared about the northern provinces. Kessler was not a lawyer or a diplomat. She was a surveyor. She went back to surveying. But she changed the way she drew the maps. Not dramatically, not in ways that were immediately obvious to anyone who looked at them, but when she drew a route now, she drew through the settlements, not around them. When she wrote her margin notes, she wrote them like she meant them. When she saw a thing, she found a name for it. Small adjustments, the kind that nobody writes about, the kind that compound over time. She was in the field again the following spring, in a coastal province 400 kilometers south of Kern, doing bridge assessments on the river delta crossings. Good work, interesting terrain, no volunteers, sufficient rations, a junior surveyor named Merritt who was good at trigonometry and terrified of water birds. She got a letter in the 3rd week of the assignment, forwarded twice from Vora. It was written in trade and also in Gret, in a hand that was careful and clear, the hand of someone who had learned to write late and taken it seriously. Sergeant Kessler, I am working now as a full interpreter for the Compact Delegation Office in Vora. Third Minister Orvith sponsored my appointment, which I mention not because I want you to think well of him, though you should, but because I want you to know that Anwen's notes were cited 11 times in the inquiry report, and that her name is in the record, official and permanent, which was what she was protecting them for. My father used to say that the most important crossings feel impossible until you are on the other side. The inquiry is the other side, I think. There is more water to cross, but this crossing is done. Save daughter of Harev, Vora Delegation Office. P.S. If you are ever in Vora, I owe you a meal. A proper one, not ration tins in a culvert. I am a decent cook, and my father taught me the river fish preparation that you have almost certainly been mispronouncing the name of. Kessler read the letter twice. Then she folded it into her field jacket's inner pocket, next to the bridge assessment notes and the compass she'd carried since Pelter. Her junior surveyor appeared at the tent opening. Sergeant, the water birds are back. Can I do the north bank from here, or do I have to? You have to go to the north bank, Kessler said, standing. The measurement is the measurement. You can't survey from a comfortable distance. She picked up her equipment. Come on. I'll show you how to read the current. They went out into the spring morning together, the delta ahead of them, the birds returning from wherever birds went in winter, the river moving south and steady, and entirely indifferent to the arguments of the people who had put their names on either bank. It did not know about borders. Kessler looked at it and thought, all right then. She walked to the water's edge and took the measure of the crossing. And she did not fight the current.